Hello, and welcome to our webinar, The Good Enterprise AI Benefits and Use Cases. The episodes covering bad and the ugly are scheduled, and you can register them using the links in the attachments. I'm Jerry Murphy, the Senior Vice President of Research and Consulting of Nemertes, and joining me is John Burke, the Nemertes CTO.
Woohoo.
Hey, we do encourage you to submit your questions you have anywhere along the way using the Q&A panel on the right. There's a question mark there. And to check for any attachments for ways to connect about us. So what we're going to do here is talk about this AI studies. First, we'll just have a brief talk about who Nemertes is. Then we'll tell you about the nature of what it is we're studying. Following that, we're going to sort of go through what some of the current use cases are for enterprise AI, what we see from the results of our research on the benefits people are seeing for an enterprise AI, and then we'll follow that with any recommendations, followed by your copious questions. All right, a little bit about Nemertes. We are a IT advisory research company. We tend to focus on the impact of technology on your business. So we look at things like what are the success metrics you have to have? What is the return on investment for technologies? What are some of the trends and challenges of technologies, not just from a technology perspective, but from a business perspective, personnel perspective, process? We really like to think that we have an industry-leading research methodology. We talk to people directly. We don't just throw out surveys and hope people answer them. We literally talk to people who are practitioners, get their insights of what they're doing, what their challenges are. We go through that data by hand to make sure that we understand it. And we also interview vendors to see what they're doing with technology and what the impacts on that are. Some of the areas that we cover, as you can see here, one of the big ones lately has been cybersecurity. We also focus on digital transformation and leadership, next generation infrastructure operations, emerging technologies such as quantum technologies, and enterprise artificial intelligence, which is what we're talking about today.
I think that's my cue. Thanks, right. Jerry. Oh, sorry. Premature advancement there. So we recently concluded a research study on enterprise AI. If you watched the first episode in this series, then you will have already seen this information. But if you haven't, then you're going to catch up on that later. In the spring, so ending in June, we interviewed IT professionals at 28 separate companies. Seven of them financial firms, and more than 8 other industries represented across the rest of the population. They were relatively large, with a median employee count of 23,000 plus and a median annual revenue of 7.8 billion plus. But we spoke with folks, down in the 100 million revenue range and down in the 150 staffers range as well. So there's a good broad range of companies by size and by industry. But those aren't the only ways that we look at the information. We also, throughout what you're going to see in the rest of this presentation and in the ones that follow, we also divided our population up into a series of groups, one based on their approach to IT at the corporate level, where we have folks who are more conservative about IT and tend to look at it as mainly a cost-cutting measure or purely a cost-cutting measure, and folks who are more aggressive on technology, who look at it as a source of competitive advantage and something that they invest in strategically. So that's one way that we're dividing up the results. Another way is by size, as I discussed, with the smaller companies versus the larger companies. And lastly, we took a look at our participants and their responses this time in terms of productivity, and noticed that we had a group who were very highly productive with revenues of more than $1 million per employee, and divided them from everybody else so that we could compare their responses to everybody else's. And of course, because we have a large chunk of financial services companies in the response pool here, we included for our clients, not doing it in this show, cuts for the financial services vertical specifically. So throughout, we'll see responses divvied up across these various categories. And one of the first things we wanted to find out is what people were actually using AI for. So not just thinking about it, not just talking about it, but what had they actually deployed? And what we saw is that the majority had deployed it in some internal operational capacity. So more than 57% of folks there, and that a minority of companies had also, or instead, deployed it in some customer-focused capacity. They were maybe using chatbots in their contact centers, or were using it in cybersecurity, using AI to help them, sift through the haystack and look for the needles in their alerting and monitoring systems. A fair number of folks have it in production, but they haven't quite decided exactly what they're using it for. So they're trying a little of this, a little of that. And in some cases, it is in production, but it is basically in the hands of individual users. So it is not being used at a departmental level. It is not being used at a corporate level. It is being used at an individual level. People are using it to help them write memos or understand data sets that they're examining, but not as a departmental function.
I think they're using it to help write their employee performance reviews, I hate to say.
Yes, actually, we do hear that is happening. And lastly, the smallest number say that they're using it already for coding and having AI help them write code for them for applications or just for system scripting. And that use case is highlighted in one of the comments that we collected from folks during the course of the interviews. They were using it for initial code generation, initial documentation generation, and then, of course, turning it over to humans for filling that code out, fleshing that code out, error checking that code, etc., filling out that documentation, fleshing out that documentation. One of my favorite comments to come out of the whole thing was, we use RPA for repetitive, stupid tasks. And that really is expressing one of the main through lines in this the good presentation, which is that using it to supercharge automation is one of the primary ways that companies are realizing value by deploying AI. And if we look at things across that cultural dividing line, and the little 3 chevrons up in the corner indicates that this is a slide comparing IT cultures, we see that the more aggressive organizations are more likely to be using AI in some use cases than everybody else, less likely in a few. They are more likely, especially, to be using it in customer-facing and cybersecurity use cases, with nearly 30% of them saying they're using them this way. They are substantially less likely to be using AI for internal operations and internal code development. And this is very interesting to us because normally aggressive organizations kind of lead on all categories, all use cases. But our suspicion is that they basically leapt ahead in these non-internal use cases and are advancing more cautiously on the internal use cases because they'd already gone with a lot of optimized and aggressive deployments of technology in those spaces that they haven't even fully finished digesting. So they're a little slower off the mark on those. When we look at it by company size, we're seeing that larger organizations are 4 times as likely to be using AI in customer-facing applications as everybody else, 3 times as likely to be using it in cybersecurity as everybody else, and more than twice as likely to be using it for internal operations. They're also substantially more likely to be using it for code development. And in part, and we'll see this in other places as well, this is because large companies have more resources to point at adopting and figuring out what to do with these new technologies as they come in, and in part because many of our aggressive companies are also large companies. There's some bleed over from that set to this set.
And I was just going to throw out there my experiences, especially with smaller companies. They have long ago outsourced code development to software as a service companies. So while it's potentially they could revisit it, I mean, a lot of smaller companies just simply don't write their own code anymore.
And I think it's also notable that they are substantially less likely than smaller companies to have use of AI being employee determined. And that is because these larger companies also tend to have a more mature governance framework in place across the board in IT, and especially within AI. So if we look at the highly productive companies, we see that they are generally less likely to be using AI in these various use cases than the less productive companies, but are substantially more likely to be applying it to internal operations and somewhat more likely to be applying it to internal code development. They are paragons of efficiency because they are so productive in that sense of spending less to make more. So they're applying AI to further streamlining and accelerating internal operations and internal code development makes total sense.
Yeah.
So looking at the use cases that folks are engaging AI for, it's easy to see that the larger, the more productive organizations focus on using it for internal operations, and that the use of AI in customer-facing applications seems like a super obvious choice, especially for these larger organizations, but based on the evidence so far, may not make these folks more productive, at least not quickly. So we're going to watch that space and see how it develops.
Yeah, and I think there is a difference between creativity doesn't imply productivity, right? So
Right.
if you look at, especially with large language models and generative AI, you know, it implies some kind of creativity and identity, but not necessarily productive in terms of efficiencies.
Sure, sure. And before we dive into which organizations are applying AI internally, I'm going to take a moment and ask folks, if you have questions, to click on the question mark in the side panel of your control bar there, or of your console there, and send them our way. If we can answer them right away, we will. If we can't, we'll answer them at the end of the session during the Q&A session. And yeah, so pop them in there as soon as they occur to you. Don't hold it in the back of your head to enter later, because we might pass entirely away from the chance to have it answered right in the moment.
And they'll stay there for us. We'll be looking for them, and they'll stay there. We can look at them later.
Indeed, indeed. So which organizations are using AI within a company? And overwhelmingly, it's IT and the lines of business that are employing AI currently, with a much lower level of adoption amongst sales, marketing, accounting, customer service, the other internal departments that are not lines of business and not IT. So we'll see some of the details on this by these various slicing agencies. But one of the things we're coming away with is the idea that there's a lot of opportunities for organizations to make broader use of AI in these other departments. So if we look at the technologically aggressive companies, we see that they are I'm sorry, I think I got something inverted in my caption there. We see that the more aggressive organizations are not more likely to be using it for line of business and IT applications, and they are only slightly more likely to be using it in some other places, like in sales. They're way more likely to be using it in legal. So there are some interesting opportunities there for the more aggressive companies to catch up to their less aggressive brethren in how they apply this and where they apply this. When we look at large versus smaller, we see that large companies are across the board using AI more widely. They are applying it not just in IT and the lines of business, more likely to be applying it in IT and the lines of business, but more likely to be applying it in every other department, every other aspect of the business. And again, a lot of that has to do with the fact that they are large. They have more resources. They have more humans that they can point at these things, and a readier mechanism for incorporating new technologies into their operations. When we look at the highly productive companies, we see that they tend to lead as far as the breadth of adoption across departments within the organization, with only sales and customer service lagging behind. So we suspect that the more productive folks, when they can see how applying it in customer service and sales will make them more productive still, will likely jump in and embrace it. But until they see those specific use cases, they will likely hang back. And we think they're not alone in missing out on some benefits that they could be deriving by using AI in groups other than IT in the lines of business. We think that there's a lot of opportunities, like in a sales department, for things like automated RFP responses, and in a marketing department for things like automated translation of sales materials. And we're hoping to get more data and prove those things out in our next iteration.
And part of what it feels like to me too is, as all this has been relatively new, especially with the generative AI stuff, it almost feels to me like business units are doing something pretty independent of IT. And at some point, it'll be interesting to see if they can actually talk to each other and collaborate and get some additional integrations and benefits that way. But I think time will see whether that happens or not.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And I believe here I hand off to you.
Oh, yeah. So anyhow, so what are some of the benefits and what you're seeing here are some of the things that we're hearing from people. From my perspective, what this is largely three areas. One is time to market. Are we being able to do something quicker than we were able to do it before? That tends to be on the business side of things. On the IT side, you see a lot of things about automation. Can we take something, especially if it's some routine thing, and make that routine thing quicker? And the other thing, somewhat related to time mark, but a little bit different, is the speed of generating content. I'm especially seeing this in, say, in the media industries, where they're actually, when you talk to these people, they almost are feeling like this is, absolutely critical to the life of our industry. We need to get new content quicker, and they're seeing that this is a way that we're going to get to markets quicker. When you're looking at the benefits of AI, right? You're seeing automation there, as I said, speed of time to market, new and better ideas are really jumping out there compared to things like risk reduction, reliability, and interestingly here, cost savings. And related to cost savings is this concept of staff reduction. We're asking people, and I apologize if this comes up later, it's like, are you actually going to be seeing a reduction of staff as a result of using AI? And the answer is no. Most companies are thinking, not only is it, we're going to maybe save staff on routine stuff, but far more likely, you're creating potentially new lines of business and markets or new areas of expertise, which actually might increase the amount of people there. So, to me, it was a little bit counterintuitive to think that, really all of this AI stuff is not about cost savings. It's a lot more about transformation than it is cost savings.
It's probably worth noting too that, right now, it's not clear if AI capable of really replacing a creative human or knowledge worker is going to be substantially cheaper than the human replaced. That's one careful consideration for the future. And also that the idea of using AI to drive cost savings was not one that was prominent in the comments of the more conservative companies. They were focused on other aspects of this, like everybody else. And also probably worth mentioning, sorry, Jerry, lastly, we asked the question in an open-ended way and boiled the responses down to these categories. So we didn't just offer them these options and they picked which ones applied. We boiled up what they said to get these categories.
And I would also say this may presages a little bit the bad and the ugly too, but when you generate content, it's really cool to generate content, but all AI can do is generate content of data that exists. And then there's a question of how good is that data, which is one of the reasons you need experts looking at this stuff, because if you're generating stuff in a domain you know nothing about, you don't realize that half of what it's generating may not actually be true.
Yeah, they've shown a propensity for just inventing data that is absent if they need it to
Actually,
support the point
anecdotally,
they're
I'll
making.
say this too, right? I actually used ChatGPT, and I said, write my obituary. And I gave it some. I said, write obituary for Jerry Murphy. And I was born here. I went to this school. I had these jobs. And it actually did a pretty reasonable, putting text around those things. I then did another one saying, write my obituary, giving it no data. And if you didn't know me, you go, oh, wow, that it was like, it would say like I was born in New York City. Why? Because that's where statistically more you're likely to have been born as opposed to Grinnell, Iowa. But I in fact was not born in New York City. But you look at it and go, wow, but it was complete nonsense. So kind of scary.
Kind of scary.
Anyhow, so when you look at sort of comparing sort of aggressive versus conservative companies on where they're seeing the benefits, the aggressive organizations really saw values in idea creation and risk reductions, but the conservative companies much more on things like automation, reliability, and agility. So we were seeing some differences there when you looked at aggressive versus conservative. Similarly, when you compare larger organizations and smaller ones, large organizations, we're seeing benefits overall. So if you see here the yellows, large, very, very large companies, you can see across all these areas, large companies saw benefits to a greater or less extent in all these areas, where smaller companies weren't really seeing them in things like reliability and risk reduction, but we're only seeing them in areas like automation and idea creation. When you look at productive companies and productivity, highly productive organization, definitely seeing it in the agility and risk reduction, but they were less likely to see it in areas like automation and ideation. That kind of makes sense if you think productive companies in the sense of, and again, our definition was maximum dollars per employee, right? They really are looking at things much more in the area of efficiencies, which idea creation, not necessarily something that somebody would ascribe with things like efficiency. And some of the final takeaways that we see here, when you see faster, better, cheaper, an interesting point is yes, faster, yes, cheaper, but not necessarily better is something that you're going to go there. And, it really does say that, you want to look at ways of making things better. And what I think part of what we're implying is better maybe only works if you have expertise in the area where it's doing things. Relying on AI to make things better when you don't have anybody there to look at what better is, maybe isn't necessarily the right way to go. And I think this is going off to you for some final recommendations.
Indeed, it is. Thank you very much. And following this, we'll go into Q&A. Our recommendations based on the data that we've got are to focus attention on using AI to automate standard administrative department functions in things like legal and HR and marketing, and to explore AI tools that can do either one-shot or low-shot learning, and that have been specifically trained in relevant problem domains. So a legal trained AI for legal questions and HR trained AI for HR questions. We've seen that the general purpose large language models can do some wild and in some cases extremely damaging things because they're not specialized in the areas in question, and because they're not held to a high standard of speaking accurately with respect to what is known about law, especially, or HR policies in a company. Focus attention on ways of using AI to do things better, i.e. making solutions more resilient or less fragile, or improving security and reducing risk. And as an IT department, develop service offerings that you can deliver to other groups within the organization. So delivering AI as a service, essentially, to sales, to marketing, to whoever. And support broader, safe use of AI within your organization by moving quickly to establish governance and policies, including a digital ethics policy, and including effective enforcement mechanisms within that set of policies, making sure to bring to the table any existing risk management or compliance folks already working. So it's great if you've got a risk management department to make sure they're at the table day one to help you deal with policies around AI.
Great. So thanks a lot for that. So we would just like to say, if you're working in enterprise IT, we'd love to have you join our private online community that's specifically for technology professionals. All you have to really do is fill out a short application on our website. If you click this nemertes.com/community, it's easy to apply there. And then you can fill out the Bright Talk webinar where it asks how you've heard about our community. And it's pretty much that simple to do. And before we go to Q&A, I just also wanted to let you know there are some attachments tabs. If you go to the little paperclip, there are different things that you can get information here. And if you go there, you can collect on us on LinkedIn with Nemertes. You can join our online community. And we have some of our other episodes. Our previous episode on AI maturity, and you can look there for registering for future episodes for the bad and the ugly. So bring your attention to that. And this replay, before we go to the replay, there's the upcoming ones that you can see there. And next, I guess, would be any questions anybody might have. So I'm looking here. I'm not seeing anything. While we wait for any questions. John, from your perspective, I know you've talked with a lot of our clients about this. You've looked to research. What would you say would be the easiest, and I'm going to say easiest and lowest risk, but those are maybe two different questions. But what do you think would be the easiest way if somebody's really hasn't done anything with AI yet? What would be the sort of easiest way for somebody to start investigating this for their own companies if they haven't already?
Sure. Two things come to mind. One, look at your existing strategic vendor partners. You almost always have one, at least. If you're working with Salesforce, if you're working with Microsoft, whoever, see what their AI assistant looks like, and at least try it out. Do a proof of concept for working with that specific thing. But the one within Salesforce is Einstein or something like that.
Yeah.
See if you can make use of that in your sales processes. The Microsoft has a bunch of Copilot offerings, right?
Right.
See if Copilot makes sense for your database programmers or whoever. So try it out with a strategic partner. And then the second thing would be to look at some of the general purpose products that are out there, and just dip your toe in using them for creative applications where strict adherence to the facts is not necessarily a number one requirement, and see what you can do with that. A low risk area would be initial code generation, as we saw in one of the comments earlier, where it's not your production code, but it might be the first draft of the first piece of your production code, and will provide the basis for filling out the thing entirely. And documentation likewise.
That sounds great, John. Hey, thanks a lot for your feedback on that and your information. Thanks a lot, everybody, for listening. The replay for this should be up on our channel shortly. If you did find this valuable, please share it with your colleagues, and please take a moment to rate this webinar. Thanks a lot for joining us today, and we look forward to having you on future presentations.
Thanks, everyone.